One of the most valuable skills you can develop today is critical thinking. It's the skill that allows you to think for yourself instead of borrowing someone else's opinions. Think about it. What's the point of reading books if you never question what you're reading? If you never separate what's true from what isn't? Don't become a bucket that everyone pours ideas into. Learn to filter those ideas. Now, this isn't an easy skill to build. It takes time, experience, and a lot of practice. One of the best ways to develop it is by testing the advice you hear. It doesn't matter whether it comes from a book, a podcast, or someone you admire. Try it. If it works for you, you've learned something valuable. If it doesn't, that doesn't automatically mean the advice is bad. It might simply mean it wasn't right for you. That's when you begin to realize that people are different, and there isn't one solution that works for everyone. You build this skill by living, by working, by meeting different people, by reading, by training, and by constantly asking yourself, does this actually make sense? Over time, that habit will make you more independent than most people, but independence like that has a price. And most people are not willing to pay it, because the moment you stop accepting things at face value, you start standing apart from the crowd. And standing apart is uncomfortable. It's easier to agree, it's easier to nod along, it's easier to repeat what everyone else is repeating. Critical thinking asks you to do the harder thing, to pause, to ask questions nobody else is asking, to risk being wrong in public instead of being silently wrong in private. Most people never take that risk. They let other people's confidence replace their own reasoning. Someone speaks with certainty, and certainty gets mistaken for truth. But certainty is not evidence. Confidence is not proof. A person can be completely sure of something and still be completely wrong. Your job is not to be impressed by confidence. Your job is to check the reasoning underneath it. Ask where the idea came from. Ask what it's based on. Ask what would have to be true for it to be false. That last question alone will change how you see the world, because most people only ask what supports this belief. They rarely ask what would prove this belief wrong. If you can't imagine any evidence that would change your mind, you're not thinking anymore. You're defending. There's a difference between having a belief and owning a belief. A belief you were handed by your family, your culture, your feed, your favorite influencer, that's a borrowed belief. It might be true, but you didn't earn it, you inherited it. A belief you tested, questioned, challenged, and still hold after real scrutiny, that's an owned belief. That one belongs to you. Most people are walking around full of borrowed beliefs and calling them their own. They've never once asked where those beliefs came from. This is where media literacy becomes part of critical thinking, whether people realize it or not. Every day, you are fed information by algorithms that don't care whether it's true. They care whether it keeps you watching. The most emotional headline wins your attention, not the most accurate one. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Fear spreads faster than facts. Certainty spreads faster than honest uncertainty. If you don't actively filter what enters your mind, something else will decide what enters it for you. And that something else is not looking out for your best interests. It's looking out for your engagement. So ask yourself, before you share something, before you believe something, before you let it shape your mood or your worldview, who benefits if I believe this? Who profits if I get angry right now? Who wins if I stop thinking and start reacting? That single pause, that one moment of hesitation before reacting, is critical thinking in action. It's not about being negative or distrustful of everything. That's not critical thinking either. That's just cynicism wearing a smarter costume. A cynic doesn't believe anything. A critical thinker is willing to believe things, but only after real evidence. There's a wide gap between those two positions, and a lot of people confuse them. Being skeptical means staying open, not staying closed. It means saying, I could be convinced, but you'll have to show me why, instead of saying, nothing you say will ever change my mind. One of those keeps you learning for the rest of your life. The other one just keeps you comfortable. Now, here's something people rarely talk about. Critical thinking isn't only for evaluating other people's ideas, it's also for evaluating your own. Your own opinions deserve the same scrutiny you give everyone else's. Ask yourself why you believe what you believe about money, about relationships, about your career, about your own limits. Did you arrive at that belief through experience and evidence? Or did you absorb it from a parent, a bad breakup, a single failure you never examined? A lot of what people call just who I am is actually just an untested conclusion from one moment in their past, generalized to their entire life. I'm bad with money might really mean I made one mistake at 22 and never questioned the story I told myself about it. I'm not a people person might really mean I had one painful social experience and built an identity around avoiding it ever again. Critical thinking means going back and re-examining those stories, not to torture yourself with the past, but to ask, is this conclusion still accurate, or is it just old and unexamined? This applies especially to advice about money. Someone will tell you to always invest in real estate. Someone else will tell you real estate is a trap and only the stock market makes sense. Someone else will tell you both are wrong and the only real wealth comes from building a business. All three of them will sound completely convinced. Your job isn't to figure out who's right. In some universal sense, your job is to understand the reasoning behind each position, test what applies to your situation, and build your own framework instead of adopting someone else's completely. The same applies to health advice, to relationship advice, to productivity advice. There's no shortage of people who will tell you their method is the only method that works, but their life is not your life. Their body is not your body. Their relationships, their finances, their personality, their circumstances, none of that is identical to yours. So when advice fails for you, don't automatically assume you failed. And don't automatically assume the advice was a lie either. Ask a better question. Ask, under what conditions does this actually work? And do those conditions apply to me? That question alone will save you years of chasing advice that was never built for your situation in the first place. Now, let's talk about something uncomfortable. Critical thinking will sometimes put you at odds with people you love. Because thinking independently doesn't just apply to strangers on the internet or authors of books you've never met. It applies to your parents, your community, the traditions you were raised inside of. That's a much harder version of this skill to practice because disagreeing with a stranger costs you nothing. Disagreeing with your own family can cost you belonging. Most people choose belonging over truth. It's a completely human choice. Nobody should be shamed for wanting connection over conflict, but you should at least be honest with yourself about which one you're choosing and why. Are you agreeing because you've actually thought it through and you agree? Or are you agreeing because disagreement feels too expensive? There's no universal right answer here, but there is a version of you who knows the difference and a version of you who doesn't. Aim to be the version who knows the difference. Let's go back to something simpler for a moment. The habit of testing advice instead of just believing it. This sounds obvious when you hear it, but almost nobody actually does it. Most people read a book, feel inspired for 3 days, and then go right back to their old patterns, having never actually tested a single idea from it in real life. Reading isn't the same as thinking. Consuming isn't the same as evaluating. You can read 50 books a year and still never build critical thinking if all you're doing is downloading information without ever running it through your own experience. The people who actually grow are the ones who take one idea, one single idea, and test it against their real life for 30 days before deciding whether it's true for them. Not theoretically true, actually true in practice for their actual circumstances. That's slower. That's less exciting. It won't give you the instant dopamine hit of feeling like you learned something just because you finished a chapter. But it's the only method that actually builds the skill instead of just building your library of borrowed opinions. Here's another branch of this same idea. Critical thinking also means learning to sit with uncertainty. Most people can't tolerate not knowing, so they grab the first confident answer available and call it truth, just to make the discomfort go away. But some of the most important questions in life don't have clean answers yet. Not for you personally, and sometimes not for anyone. A thinking person is willing to say, I don't know yet, instead of pretending to have certainty they don't actually have. That phrase, I don't know yet, is one of the most underrated sentences a person can say. It keeps the door open. It keeps you learning. It keeps you from locking in a wrong answer just because it felt better than admitting confusion. There's also a version of critical thinking that applies to disagreement itself. When someone challenges your opinion, notice your first reaction. Is it curiosity or is it defensiveness? Defensiveness protects your ego. Curiosity protects your growth. You can only pick one in that moment. The strongest thinkers you'll ever meet are the ones who get genuinely excited when someone disagrees with them, because it means there's a chance to either strengthen their position or discover they were wrong about something. Either outcome is a win. Weak thinkers treat disagreement as an attack. Strong thinkers treat it as free information. Now, none of this means you should doubt everything equally, all the time, forever. That would be exhausting and impossible to live by. Some things deserve heavy scrutiny. Life-altering decisions, financial commitments, beliefs that shape how you treat other people, ideas that ask you to give up your money, your time, or your loyalty. Other things don't need the same level of interrogation. You don't need to run a full investigation before deciding whether to try a new recipe. Part of critical thinking is knowing where to spend your scrutiny. Not everything deserves the same amount of mental energy. Save your deepest questioning for the decisions that will actually shape your life. Don't waste it all on trivial things while sleepwalking through the decisions that matter most. There's something else worth mentioning. Critical thinking isn't a solo activity forever. At some point, it becomes something you pass on. Watch how a child asks why about everything over and over until an adult finally gets tired and says, just because. That's usually the exact moment curiosity starts dying in a person. Not because the child stopped wanting to know, because the adults around them stopped rewarding the question. If you ever find yourself teaching, mentoring, or raising someone, resist the urge to hand them your conclusions. Hand them your questions instead. Don't just tell people what to think. Show them how you arrived at what you think and let them build their own path from there. That's the real gift, not answers. Method. Because answers expire. The world changes, new information appears, old certainties get overturned. But a person who knows how to think will always be able to find new answers, long after your old ones have stopped working. Let's talk about failure for a moment, because it connects directly to all of this. Failure is one of the most honest teachers available to you, but only if you're willing to examine it instead of running from it. Most people fail at something and immediately build a story to protect their ego. It wasn't my fault. The market was bad. That person never gave me a real chance. Sometimes those stories are true, but sometimes they're just comfortable lies dressed up as explanations. A critical thinker is willing to ask the harder question after a failure. What part of this was actually within my control, and what did I get wrong? That question is uncomfortable. Almost nobody enjoys asking it. But it's also the only question that turns failure into actual growth instead of just pain with no return. If you skip that question, you don't get wiser. You just get older with the same blind spots you started with. Now think about how this same principle applies to success too, not just failure. When something works out for you, ask why. Was it your decision making? Or was it timing? Was it skill? Or was it luck wearing skills clothing? If you can't tell the difference, you'll try to repeat a formula that never actually worked the way you thought it did. A lot of confident advice out there comes from people who succeeded once, misunderstood why, and have been repeating the wrong lesson to others ever since. That's not dishonesty. It's just unexamined success. And unexamined success is just as unreliable as unexamined failure. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about identity, because critical thinking eventually touches that too. At some point, you have to ask yourself an uncomfortable question. How much of who I am is actually me, and how much of it is just the accumulated opinions of people I never bothered to question? Your taste in what's cool, your definition of success, your assumptions about what a good life looks like. How much of that did you actually choose, and how much of it did you simply absorb from your surroundings without ever noticing? This isn't about rejecting everything you were taught. Plenty of it might genuinely be right for you. It's about the difference between inheriting a life and choosing one. An inherited life runs on autopilot. It follows the script everyone around you is following without ever asking whether that script actually leads somewhere you want to go. A chosen life takes the same information and runs it through your own filter first. Same inputs, completely different outputs. And the difference is entirely in whether you thought it through or just went along with it. Here's one more branch worth exploring. Critical thinking will sometimes make you slower than everyone else, and that's not a flaw, that's the point. In a world that rewards instant reactions, hot takes, and fast opinions, the person who says, "Let me think about that," looks out of step. But speed and accuracy are not the same thing. Being first to react has never once been the same as being right. The fastest opinion in the room is usually the least examined one. It's whatever thought arrived first and got said before a second thought had time to challenge it. Give yourself permission to be slow when the decision actually matters. Nobody remembers who reacted fastest. People remember who was right and who they could actually trust to think clearly when it counted. There's a quiet kind of confidence that comes from this whole way of living, not the loud, performative confidence of someone who has an opinion on everything within 3 seconds, a quieter one. The confidence of someone who knows they don't have to accept an idea just because it's popular, who knows they don't have to reject an idea just because it's unfamiliar, who has learned to sit with a question long enough to actually understand it before deciding what they think. That kind of person is rare, not because the skill is impossible to learn, but because almost nobody is willing to put in the years it takes. It's built one small decision at a time, one tested piece of advice, one re examined belief, one uncomfortable disagreement you sat with instead of avoiding, one "I don't know yet" instead of a fake certainty. None of those moments look impressive on their own, but stacked over years, they build something most people never develop. A mind you can actually trust because you built it yourself, question by question, instead of borrowing it from everyone around you. So the next time you hear a piece of advice delivered with total confidence, don't just accept it and don't just reject it either. Test it. Ask what it's built on. Ask what would prove it wrong. Ask whether it actually applies to your life or just sounds good in a video. Keep what holds up. Let go of what doesn't, and never let another person's certainty replace your own thinking. That habit, repeated for years, is what separates people who are truly thinking from people who are simply repeating. And over time, that's what will make you one of the rare few who actually knows their own mind.